Number 1 is Aston Hall. Aston Hall is a well-known haunted location around Birmingham, situated in Aston of West Midlands. Built between 1618 and 1635 by the local squire Thomas Holt. It is thought that Aston Hall is the most haunted building in Birmingham, with paranormal activity being well documented over the past century. One of the richest men in the country had been knighted by King James I in 1603 and brought the title of baronet when James was raising funds to keep Ireland under control. Aston Hall was built to reflect the rank, wealth and influence of Thomas at the time. Thomas was a personal friend of King Charles I and allowed the king to stay at Aston Hall on the evening of the 18th of October 1642, just before he lost the Battle of Edgehill during the English Civil War. Support for the king resulted in a 3-day siege, with parliamentarians attacked the royalist garrison stationed there, and the hall was badly damaged. Some of this damage can still be seen on the balustrade of the Great Stairs. There is a hole in the staircase when a cannonball went through a window and an open door into the banister. The Civil War impoverished the estate, which was inherited by Sir Robert Holt, MP for Warwickshire, who was the son of Edward Holt and grandson of Thomas Holt. In 1817 it was leased to the oldest son of James Holt, and following his death in 1848 the property was sold to the Corporation of Birmingham. It has since been renovated externally and internally, even though most original furniture is not there anymore. It is thought that Aston Hall is the most haunted building in Birmingham. The most active ghost at Aston Hall is the Grey Lady, who is thought to be Holt's daughter. It is said that she chose to elope and marry the man she loved, rather than the man picked out for her to marry. But her father found out about her plan and put a stop to it by locking her up for 16 years in a room on the upper floor. Loneliness took its toll, and when she died 16 years later, she had gone insane. Her ghost is seen at least twice a year, and people often mistake her for staff dressed in period costume. Mrs. Walker, a housekeeper of Sir Thomas Holt, is also known as the Green Lady of Aston Hall. Her apparition is often seen wearing a long green dress, sitting in a chair in the housekeeper's room or in the Great Hall. She never says anything and usually will disappear shortly after being noticed. The entrance to the central tower and servants' quarters is made via a long corridor on the roof. It is known as Dick's Garret, after a servant boy hung himself there after being accused of stealing from his employers. It is recorded that his ghost was seen very often about the hall, but over the course of time his appearances have become a few and far between now. Number 2 is Birmingham Catacombs, also known as Wallstone Lane Cemetery in the Jewellery Quarters. Dates back to 1847 and is a Grade 2 listed on the Registry of Parks and Gardens of Special History Interest. One of its main features is the 2 tiers catacombs, which were required by the Birmingham Cemeteries Act of 1846 to be concealed with lead or pitch due to the unhealthy vapours and unpleasant smells emanating from them. These catacombs are home to John Baskerville, creator of the Baskerville type of face. This unfortunate soul's corpse had a fair way to travel before reaching his final resting place in Moorstone Lane Cemetery. John Baskerville was very successful in the trepanning trade, which was the application of liqueur to buttons, snuff boxes and candlesticks, etc. Before he made his fortune in the trepanning trade, he was well known for the beautiful calligraphy and typography he used to inscribe tombstones and memorials. Here it is supposed is where the groundings of the now famous Baskerville typeface began. He fell on hard times after attempting to publish a series of unpopular books and retreated to his mansion Easy Hill, now known as Baskerville House. He died in January of 1775, and his will required that he be buried vertically in a vault on his own property. Unfortunately, that is not where he remained. When his wife Sarah died in 1788, Easy Hill was sold, and after a complicated series of events, it was taken for canal wharfs and buildings. Baskerville's body was found beneath a pile of gravel. It was incredibly well preserved, given that it had spent 46 years underground, and this was attributed to the airtight lead-lined coffins. Because of Baskerville's outspoken euthanasia, he was refused burial in the local cemetery, and the coffins spent the 8 years in canal builder Thomas Gibson's warehouse in Cambridge Street. Gibson exhibited the body for sixpence a head, and one of those curious visits, Thomas Underwood sketched the body on August the 5th, 1829. In terms of ghosts, a woman dressed in 1930s clothes has been seen many times, and has shocked onlookers by walking through walls and parked cars, even causing a moving car to screech to a halt, only to smile at the driver and promptly disappear. Accompanying sightings of this lady, people claim to have noticed a smell of pear drops, which is what arsenic is said to smell like after it has been swallowed. This dangerous substance was used in the jewellery quarter at one time, which leads us to believe that this lady was killed by arsenic poisoning. Another witness claims to have spoken to a young man in an army-style trench coat near the catacombs. During conversation, the young man referred to the Dudley Road Hospital as the Infirmary, a name not used for the hospital since 1948. When the witness walked away and turned to look again at the young man, he had disappeared. Given that many times in Moorstone's history, bodies were dug up and reburied, it is a little wonder why the area is haunted. It was known in the early 18th century as Dead Man's Lane, and it is possible that at some point a gallows would have been situated nearby. These were traditionally placed as crossroads as they allowed unconsecrated burials, and one such crossroads exists where the lane meets Inkneeld Street. Moorstone Lane and Key Hill Cemetery are haunted and lovely, especially at dusk, which is when we visited, but many people also warn that the area can be quite dangerous after dark. With this in mind, it is advised to see them during daylight hours. Now, when we visited the catacombs, we went on 2 occasions, one in daylight and one at midnight. As soon as the sun fades, the catacombs takes a totally different feel. There was areas we couldn't stay in too long as we felt threatened. Our equipment was telling us there was energy in places where there shouldn't be. At one stage we had to leave the grounds completely to turn around and see the same man in the long trench coat following us to disappear in the wall at the top of the road, which is the jury quarters, which only means there was a door there at one time. Number 3. Steelhouse Lane Lockup. Steelhouse Lane is a graded 2 listed building. It first opened in 1891 and operated until 2016. The building is separated by a tunnel that goes under Coleridge Passage, which used to see prisoners being sent from the cells directly to the courts. Prisoners would generally spend less than 24 hours in the lockup before being sent to court in the morning. The building had a mixture of Steelhouse Lane prisoners arrested in the city centre and awaited interview or charge, and people charged with offences all over Birmingham, who were brought in on a custody van each morning. Some of the original iron railings have been removed and partitioned, put in to separate Steelhouse Lane prisoners from lockup prisoners. They were originally around 70 cells spread across the floors. The lockup is entered at ground level, and there is a basement and a first floor. The basement contains the original kitchen, and there is evidence of an old dumb waiter, potentially powered by an early Birmingham hydronics network, which would have been used to transport food up to the ground and first floors. Steelhouse Lane is famously known for holding Fred West, which was only held until his court appearance, which would have been no longer than 24 hours. It is also known to hold the Peaky Blinders also. I have walked past this building so many times as I live in Birmingham and never once seen it as a haunted location until I watched it on the TV with the Most Haunted team, and their visit, it was quite shocking what they caught on film, so I paid a visit myself and was quite shocked on the level of energy picked up there. You can see shadow figures on the top floor and bangs from the cell doors. The REM pod and K2 devices go off all of a sudden for no reason, and by chance it is in the cell that Fred West was held in. We did get a voice come through on the ghost box also, telling us that he hurt children and women and will do it again. I should fear him, so that was kind of funny. The downfall of Steelhouse Lane is because of health and safety. The lights have to remain on in the halls, but in the cells it does get pretty dark, so don't be put off going there. Number 4. Birmingham Council House. Birmingham Council House is a Grade 2 listed building situated in Victoria Square. It was built in 1875. The first stone was laid by Joseph Chamberlain, who was Mayor of Birmingham 3 times and then later became an MP. He was a very important political figure of the time and the father of Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. He did a great deal for Birmingham's poor, working tirelessly to alleviate their situation, and in doing so he cleared slum areas and had better houses built for those that worked in the city. He died in 1914, and it is said that his ghost haunts his office in the council house in the corner of the building on the first floor. His ghost has been seen walking the corridors and sometimes standing behind his old desk. A strong smell of cut flowers is said to accompany sightings of Bromwich and Joan, as he insisted having these in his office. As soon as he is seen, he vanishes. The building is also said to be built on an old monastery, and as a result there have been some sightings of a ghostly monk wandering the corridors. There is also another story of the suicide of the council worker within the building, who hung himself in the entrance hall. His ghost is said to be seen hanging at the top of the great stairs, directly inside the main doors. Others claim to hear the quiet tapping of keyboard keys coming from the room where the man was said to have worked, and have entered only to find the room empty. The building is said to be the home of several apparitions, mainly Victorian gentlemen in full Victorian attire. Two of those gentlemen are said to be John Heap and William Badger, who were stonemasons hired to work on the building in 1833. They were tragically killed as they worked on the carvings of the external pillars from a wooden scaffold, when a rope snapped, causing a large piece of masonry to fall on them. A monument to them stands in St Philip's graveyard, where they are also buried. Many claim to have heard the quiet tappings of metal tools against stone late at night when the square is quiet. Are the ghosts of these two unfortunate gentlemen carrying on the work they never got to finish? His area has many tales of paranormal activity, and my particular favourite is that of Christchurch, which was built in 1805 and demolished in 1899. It stood a little way down from where the fuzzy jacuzzi water fountain now stands, and the only reminder it was ever there is Christchurch Passage, which leads from Waterloo Street to New Street. The church was never used for burials, except for a selected few inside the church itself. And when the decision was made to demolish the church, a new resting place had to be found for the poor souls interred there. Many were taken to nearby Key Hill and Warstone Lane cemeteries, and it is said that a spectral horse and cart, like the one used to take the bodies at the time, can sometimes be seen carrying its ghostly cargo all the way to the entrance of Warstone Lane Cemetery. There is a grisly story about John Baskerville that you heard at the beginning of this video. If you've not heard about John Baskerville, please rewind to the start. Number 5, Dudley Castle. This is one of my favourite locations. I love the history of Dudley. Right in the heart of the Black Country is the ancient town of Dudley. It's developed around Dudley Castle, home of the Mike Dudley family. Among them was Elizabeth's favourite, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. The castle was used as a royalist stronghold in the Civil World War and badly damaged in 1646. The 5th Baron Dudley had 2 families. His official family was in the castle, but his favoured family lived in a cottage at the foot of the castle, where, say the locals, he spent most of his time. He looked after his children well, sending his son Dud Dudley to Oxford. Dud made the important discovery that coal could be used as a furnace fuel instead of charcoal. Although his experiments were not published during his lifetime, coal became the main fuel for furnaces. It was coal that added to the wealth of the Dudley family. They owned rich coal fields around Dudley. It has been said so much coal had been mined from the hill, so which Dudley Castle stands, that one day it will collapse. Dudley Castle is teeming with ghosts. A miner was buried alive under a rockfall, and the sound of his pickaxe can sometimes be heard at night. The under-manager of the ballroom was confronted by a white illuminous figure one evening. 2 young entertainers saw the dark, hazy shape of a woman on the castle mound. Near to the castle are the ruins of St James Priory, founded in the late 1100s, and from time to time a dark monk wanders around the castle. A young man on a paranormal investigation was going up a flight of stairs when he was lifted into the air and tossed down the stairs. The investigation had to be abandoned as a fancy dress party judges decided to award a prize to an authentic looking medieval lady, but when the prizes were presented she had disappeared despite strict security. Number 6. Stratford upon Avon. In 1196 the Bishop of Worcester laid out a new town covering 109 acres on the edge of an existing Saxon village beside an ancient crossing of the River Avon. 6 streets were planned, 3 parallel to the river and 3 at right angles to it. This basic plan lies unchanged at the heart of Stratford upon Avon today. By Shakespeare's time, Stratford was still a small and leafy town of about 200 houses, with many orchards, gardens and trees. Shakespeare's father was a prominent man in the town, rising to the position of bailiff. William went to London, where he prospered as a playwright, and in 1613, his life work complete, he retired to Stratford. The following tale is one of the many hauntings in the ancient town. In strange meetings, a little girl sees an angel the night before her uncle dies in the room next door. And there's also the story of a lady who comes out of a cupboard in the evenings for a chat. One family had a male ghost called Fred, which they said was contemplating mating with their friend's female ghost, known as Miranda. The Royal Shakespeare Theatre was completed in 1932. An early theatre opened on Shakespeare's birthday in 1879, was destroyed by fire in 1926. Josh Dale told his story in 2002 when he was only 13, but already a seasoned performer. In the summer of 2001, he was selected to take part in The Prisoner's Dilemma, a new play by David Edgar, performed by the Royal Shakespeare Company at the other place. As Josh was underage, he has to have a chaperone to look after him. Even during rehearsals, she looks like his general welfare, fetching him food and drink and keeping him occupied during his stage appearances. Usually by playing Scrabble, the chaperone also acts as a link between the actor and the director. One evening during the last scene, I was hanging around in the wings, waiting to go on stage, and I found that I was on my own. There's a quick change on stage and everybody was busy. It's strange being there on your own. I felt nervous, even though there were people on the stage. I found myself thinking sad, pessimistic thoughts, such as what if I forget my lines. There's a high part behind the stage, about 1.5 times the height of a room. There were going to be a band. Part of it sticks out and there are railings along it. I didn't have anything to do, so I was looking around, and I happened to glance up, and there by the railings was the grey-white glow. I couldn't see any particular details, but the glow was in the shape of a person, just standing there, I didn't think too much about it until my mother told me that a woman had hung herself. All around the walls are pictures of past actresses and other characters who helped in the theatre, and among them is a portrait of the woman who committed suicide. The theatre staff confirmed that an actress had committed suicide, but they did not want to give her name. Number 7 is Fulford Hall in EARLSWOOD. EARLSWOOD is famous for its huge, attractive lakes, which are actually 3 man-made reservoirs known as Engine Pool, Windmill Pool and Terry's Pool. They were created in the 1820s to feed the Stratford upon Avon canal. About a kilometre to the north of EARLSWOOD Lakes is the rambling old mansion of Fulford Hall, about which are many strange rumours. The house was built in about 1897 by Colonel Johnson on land brought from the railway company. Half a century ago it hosted huge music with scenes of skirmishes and orgies. Then it lay derelict and empty for years. The sons of a local farmer rode their motorbikes up and down the stairs. Hippies moved in and began its restoration. Rumour has it that he saw a ghost in the garden. The house has now been fully restored and has kicked off the traces of its unusual past, except for a number of inexplicable accidents near its entrance gates. Cars went round in the bend, shoot across the road for no reason. A local resident says only a few weeks ago, police sirens and helicopters came because a young girl was injured and she had no idea why her car went out of control. Another person who was once found himself going through the hedge is a retired teacher, now choir master. Some 30 years ago, he was a leader of a local scout group, he says. The owner of Fulford Hall let us camp in his fields. As my daughter had just been born, I didn't stay there overnight, but went home in the evening, leaving the scouts in the care of other staff. I left the field one evening and began driving home in the twilight, and I had only gone a short way when, for no reason at all, the car suddenly went out of control, shot through a hedge and into a field. I was sitting there quite dazed and wondered what had happened when some youngsters came and tapped at the window. I wound the window down and they said, "We will push you back onto the road again." I asked how they knew I was there. They said, "You're not the first. You're the third one tonight. This is JJ's night. There's a stone here in the grass verge, and if you look at it, you will see that it's the same date." Sure enough, there it was, engraved, June the 15th, 1985. The next morning, when I returned, I looked at the hedge and saw where I had gone through the hedge and saw there wasn't even a mark on it. There wasn't even a mark on the car. The owner of Fulford Hall sometimes came to visit us, and one evening he told the following story. Jack Johnson was the owner of Fulford Hall in the late 19th century, and traditional has it that he was a miserable man. One night he was riding around the perimeter of the estate looking for poachers when he saw 2 men who were after his rabbits. Some of the village folk were so poor that that's all they had to live on was rabbits. Although JJ was plagued with rabbits, he was furious that someone would try and steal them. He stood in his stirrups and rode straight at the first poacher, knocking him down and riding the horse straight over him. Still standing in his stirrups, he levelled his blunderbuss, aiming at the second poacher. In those days the road had not been metalled and was just a path, and he evidently forgot that there was a tree right next to the road with a low branch across it. Furthermore, he was riding against the light. Suddenly there was a crash and his teeth bit the branch. This had the unfortunate result that it took his head off. The head stayed in the tree while he slithered out of the saddle onto the road. The head then fell out of the tree and onto the top of the body. 4 or 5 years later, a stone was erected on that very spot. Once a year, on the anniversary of his death, JJ comes riding at night round the peripheracy of his estate. You can hear the clippy-cloppy of his horse hooves, and when he reaches the spot where the tree once stood, the noise stops, and then you hear a crash followed by a soft thud as his head rolls out of the tree. The stone is still there. The entrance gates of Fulford Hall, it still stands over a half a metre in height and has a rounded top. The engravings read simply, JJ June 15, 1895. Number 8 is the Old Crown pub in Birmingham. The Old Crown is also believed to be the oldest pub in the city. The Old Crown dates back to 1368, which makes it a staggering 648 years old. And there's a celebration on August the 26th to mark the amazing anniversary. The Old Crown has changed over the decades. While the pub exterior has stayed largely the same with its distinctive black and white timber design, back in 1368, the leap year when it was built, the Ming dynasty was established in China. The Great Wall of China was being constructed and the National Library of France was founded at the Louvre in France by King Charles V, whose son and successor Charles VI was born at the end of the year. Although it remains its original timber frame, most of the rest of the Grade II listed building dates from the early 16th century. It was mentioned in 1538 as a mansion house of timber and was the Guide Hall and School of St John. In 1575, Queen Elizabeth I stayed there while on her way from Kenilworth Castle, and it was in 1626, the year King Charles I was crowned, and it was the first recorded as being an inn. In 1666, there is the first mention of the building being known as the Crown, and it was in this year that King Charles II and the rest of the royal court returned to London at the end of the Great Plague. The Old Crown is also up in the mid of a bloody battle while during the English Civil War. The Old Crown is now regarded as part of Digbeth, became the site of the Battle of Camp Hill in 1643, when Prince Rupert, commander of the Royalist forces, launched an attack. Birmingham was targeted because its citizens were fiercely opposed to the Royalists and had been captured, them sending the prisoners to Coventry, hence the saying sent to Coventry when someone is excluded or abstraced. Local people were heavily outnumbered against Rupert's troops. Many town folk were slaughtered by the soldiers and more than 100 houses were burnt down. By somehow, the Old Crown survived all this and is said to have been the last building left standing. An old well in the courtyard has been described as a hotspot for supernatural activity. There's said to be the spirit of a woman wandering around longing for her lost child who died after falling down the well. Among other apparitions reported in the pub is a lady in an old-fashioned clothing, that vanishes into thin air, a Victoria figure in the cellar, a mysterious mist materialising in one of the bedrooms. Staff have had their bottoms pinched by an invisible presence, and a bottle is seen moving along the bar and dropping on the floor. Number 9. Bradford Hall, Castle Bromwich. Castle Bromwich Hall was built in 1557 and 1558 by Sir Edward Devereux. First of all, it was plain. Single-storey house, but 100 years later it was brought by a man of national importance, Sir John Bridgeman, whose father was Keeper of the Great Seal of England. The Bridgemans were created Barons Bradford in 1792 and Earls of Bradford in 1815. The house was developed as benefited their status. Sightings of her by a security guard in strange meetings. Local legend tells that the ghost is that of the Lady Bradford, who came to a violent end in strange meetings. She was murdered by her husband, and in the story below she was hung on the 3rd floor. However, there seems to be no record of a violent death in the official documents, and the Bradfords rarely lived at the hall. It was unusually let. Although the house is used as offices, the gardens have now been renovated and are well worth a visit. This story is told by Barry Wright, a blacksmith. Back in the 70s, times were hard. I had a new wife to support and a new baby. The entailed painting offices at Castle Bromwich Hall, or Bradford Hall as it's sometimes known. Each office had to be completed in a weekend. Started on a Friday night and having everything back in its place by 8 AM Monday morning. All went well with the ground floor and first offices. The work was easy, just emulsioning the walls and ceilings and painting a transverse beam in each office block. I got very used to being alone in the big old building and got an easy rhythm with the work. Then I started on the 3rd top floor. The whole atmosphere of the floor was different, and the room that I was working in seemed particularly bleak. This room wasn't anybody's office. It wasn't known as the meeting room, but was seldom used. Even with the heating on, the room seemed chilled. I put my feelings down to the drawing on of winter and the long climb up to the 2nd floor with all my paraphernalia. I cleared such furniture as there was in the room and spread dust sheets on the floor. After opening and stirring a fresh gallon of white emulsion, I realised that I had to make yet another journey to my van for a new roller sleeve. When I returned to the room, I was greeted with the sight of a sea of white paint. The can, which had been standing in the middle of the floor, was lying on its side, its contents covering most of the dust sheets. Cursing and not understanding, I set about cleaning up the mess. I was now a good hour behind schedule. Frantically trying to catch up, I set about painting transfer beams black. In all the other rooms, the beams had taken about half a litre of paint to cover them. This beam was sound with a good surface. I had rubbed it down, but I just couldn't get the paint to cover. The more paint I put on, the more it soaked up. The beam had all the absorbent properties of a sponge. After about 3 litres of paint, I gave up. I never did get to finish painting that beam. I did finish the room on time, but to look at it, you wouldn't have thought it had been touched. I was loading up my van on the Monday morning. when the caretaker ambled over for a chat. His first words were, "You look rough." I told him of the events of the weekend and that I had to work so hard I had barely any sleep. He smiled the smile of one who knows something. "They do say that was the room where Lady Bradford hung herself from that same beam that you had all the trouble with." I had heard enough. Number 10. Staffordshire Royal Infirmary. In the 13th century, a hospital opened in Stafford on the eastern side of town and continued until the 1580s. On that same site, the Staffordshire Royal Infirmary was built, which was now combined with the City General Hospital and the Hart Hill Orthopaedic Hospital to become the University of North Staffordshire, one of the largest hospitals in the UK. The next two stories were told by Michelle Dolago Shelley to her friends. She was everything that you could want in a nurse. Quiet, apart from being a young, beautiful young lady, she was warm-hearted, lively, popular, and efficient. Tragically, she died recently in a road accident. In the early 1990s, I was living in the old nurses' home in the Staffordshire Royal Infirmary. About 20 rooms went off this corridor. They had been designed for nurses in training. The room I had was more splendid than the rest. It used to be the old nurse's sister's room, and I had a kitchen and a bathroom. I lived there for about 2.5 years. All the time I was there, a woman would appear to me on and off. I used to see her out of the corner of my eye. She would always appear when everyone else was out and I was on my own. I used to sense she was there. I would talk to her. I'd say, "Morning, how are you today?" If you're on shift work, you spend a lot of time on your own, and she was company for me. She used to follow me around. It just became second nature. I never thought anything about it. This went on a long time. One night I was sitting on the floor with my friend. I think we were playing cards when the door banged. We both jumped up and looked at the door at the same time. I looked at my friend, she looked at me, and we both said to each other, "Did you see that?" "What did you see?" She had seen a woman not very tall in a long cape walking past the door. I had seen her too, quite clearly, but only down to her feet, as she had no feet. I said to my friend that I had felt her presence many times. My friend had lived in the room before me, and we both laughed because we couldn't believe that anybody else had the same feelings. Did we have a ghost in the nurses' home? I asked around. We had a night warden who used to come around and make sure the place was neat and tidy. She brought some old photos into the office. Apparently during the war times a bomb had dropped on the nurses' home and a nurse had been killed. The building had been rebuilt, but now it was 2 feet higher than originally. She had perhaps been walking on the old passageway, which is 2 feet lower. When Mum and Dad were helping me to move out, I shouted to my Mum and Dad to take things, and I ran back to see if there was anybody to whom I could say goodbye to. There was no one in the corridor and nobody in the bathroom. I stood looking out of the window and over the car park, behind the nurses' home and a deaf school, just daydreaming, wondering what would happen next in my career. Suddenly I felt this presence by the side of me, and I clearly heard a middle-aged woman's voice saying, "You'll be all right." It made me jump once again. I caught a glimpse of her out the corner of my eye. I had felt quite apprehensive about this new phase in my life, but after I heard her, I felt quite calm. None of the nurses ever saw her after that. It was as if she left the nurses' home, just as I did.